Hey everybody, I have a video here for you today. Now this comes from currency from Armenia. This is a 100,000 note currency bill, and this shows the Holy Grail arriving at the Britio Esidorum in ancient Edessa, and a mistake in translation referred this to somewhere in Britain, and all history of the Holy Grail then is transferred to Britain based on this one mistake, but the original word is Britio Esidorum. And this refers to the castle in Edessa, Turkey of King Abgar. And this is the Holy Grail arriving at that ancient castle by a river that flooded and ruined the remains of the city more than a few times. But we have a knight delivering it, or some sort of warrior. And this is what we know today as the Shroud of Turin. And if this is your first Shroud video of mine you're watching, I thought I would find the Shroud to be medieval fraud, but it's actually a 2,000-year-old relic that the church is trying to suppress the history, and it's because of this. It comes from Edessa, Turkey. And if we read this from the history of the Holy Grail, this comes from Robert de Boron writing, and he really mentions it first, and he relates it to a cup of Joseph Arimathea, and it says, "This sacred cup, which had also caught Christ's blood at the deposition from the cross, feeds Joseph during 43 years in captivity." But we know Joseph in captivity for 43 years, he's given one thing from the Acts of Pilate. An apocryphal text, he is given something which he identifies Jesus from, and that is the image on the burial linen. That's what it says in the Acts of Pilate. So I'm just telling you, the Holy Grail is the Shroud of Turin, and this history has just been covered up for 2,000 years. And the only reason why the church doesn't want to associate themselves with the Shroud in direct reference, and really it should be on the cover of the Bible and in every church, is the greatest verification of this story. But no, it comes from Edessa, Turkey. And let's go over to Google Earth. This is a church I showed you overlooking Edessa, Turkey. This was built by King Abgar in the 1st century. This was a mausoleum to his son, who died, and I believe he was off with a band of brothers fighting out of Qumran, and they were fighting the Romans in Jerusalem. This was a great battle, an epic time, an epic struggle for people living in this area. Rome was really ruthless, and they were fighting the main battle at Jerusalem, and that's what kings did in ancient time. They sent their sons off to battle. But I believe one of these sons was caught and crucified, maybe even sacrificed himself just so other of his fellow members weren't killed. But he was crucified, and he was wrapped in an expensive burial linen that is referred to in apocryphal text. And something strange happened. An image of him was somehow made on the cloth, and I believe that image can be fully explained if proper research is done on the shroud. But no explanation by science has been given for how that image appears on the shroud, but I think one can be found. But to these people of Edessa, Turkey, these Edessenes that were fighting the battle out of Qumran at Jerusalem, and that's where we get Essenes from. Just take the ED off of Edessenes, the Edessenes, and that's how they're referred to. Those are the Essenes from Qumran. And Josephus is really the only one that gives us the name the Essenes, and it comes from Edessa, the Edessenes who were fighting down there. But this was built as a mausoleum to the son who was really made out to be the Messiah. The Dead Sea Scrolls is really the Messianic movement in Palestine at the moment, and this is where this whole thing comes from. They were really looking for some sign from God to help them in this revolt, because they were really up against the Roman Empire, and they were the mighty underdogs, and they were looking for a Messiah to lead them. And this is where the whole New Testament story comes from. This is the image of Jesus being delivered to King Abgar, and what this actually is. Church historian says this is delivered, and he has cured leprosy by getting the image of Jesus. But actually what this is a knight bringing a king the image of his son. His son is the new Messiah. The waterway, he builds a sacred fish pool out of that waterway, And this is in front of his castle, which has been rebuilt by later rulers of different faiths over the years. But originally, this was King Abgar's castle, and the sacred fish pool was symbolic of the reflective qualities of what we know today as the Shroud of Turin. And obviously, the fish are put in here because he is the new Messiah of the age of Pisces. And up on the hill overlooking the whole city, which is kind of symbolic of the place at Qumran, I believe. But below that church, into the walls here of that hill, is an ancient monastery. And through a lot of digging, the original name is the Jacob Monastery, translated into English. And this is where the original books were written of this perceived miracle that the Shroud of Turin gave them. That was the origin for the whole New Testament that was later written in a Romanized version. But this is the original monastery where these brothers and fellow members of this group at Qumran that was fighting the Romans, they took this miracle back to Edessa and they wrote a book here. And that book originally was called the Book of Heroes. And we know that from the Hymn of the Pearl, which is just a reference to what we know today as the Shroud of Turin. And I go over that in a previous video, and I will leave a bunch of links below. But this is the original monastery where the books were written. The book was called the Book of Heroes, and that eventually became the New Testament of the Bible in the Roman tweak version. Now, here is the front of that note, and here is King Abgar as he is depicted. And I think this is a great response to the silly story by Eusebius that he was cured of leprosy by the delivery of the image of Christ. The church writers tried to associate this holy image at Edessa to their Jesus in the Roman tweak version of what we call the New Testament. But the original story came from Edessa, Turkey, came from King Abgar, and I believe his sons were off in Jerusalem fighting the war against the Romans. And I believe this is a correct depiction of the image coming back to Edessa, Turkey, being delivered to King Abgar. And in the church historian's version, it is delivered by apostles to King Abgar. But here we have a knight or a warrior delivering it to King Abgar. And I believe this is possibly one of his sons or the close knit of people fighting against the Romans that are called the apostles in the Roman tweak version of a book that was written, the Book of Heroes, that was written up on that hill about just a mile and a half from this ancient castle. And I believe that is where the story of the Holy Grail comes from. It fits everything associated to the Holy Grail. And I said in a video here last September that maybe Leonardo knew the secret of the Holy Grail, and he put it into his Last Supper painting, and nobody really has seen it, that it was actually the tablecloth, and that is the correct dimensions of the Shroud of Turin. And I think I was exactly right. Let me read you this. This comes from the Council of Baths of Trajan from the year 325. And Pope Sylvester declared, and Emperor Constantine and 327 bishops were in attendance, he said that the holy sacrifice of Mass be celebrated on a cloth of linen consecrated by a bishop, as if it were the clean shroud of Christ. And I'm sure Leonardo, making the most important painting of the first communion ever depicted, would have known everything written about communion. And he would have known the tablecloth or the linen that this is supposed to be served on is supposed to be depicted as the clean shroud of Christ. Leonardo knew this. He put it into his painting. It all makes sense. It's supposed to be served on a clean cloth as if it were the clean shroud of Christ, because then the wine and the wafer on it would represent the blood and the body on the image, or the image on the cloth. We know that there is blood on it through scientific testing. The image represents the body. That's the Holy Grail. And as far as the Knights Templar knowing the secret, I think they did. And they always talked symbolically. Now, the Templars definitely had the shroud. This was their great secret against the church. I don't believe there was a greater secret you could have had than where the whole New Testament Jesus story originated from, and it came from Edessa, Turkey, and that was the Templars' great secret. They got the shroud in a crusade of 1204, I believe, and I'm going to do kind of a trail of possession all the way up until it goes into a church in Turin, Italy in a later video. But I definitely think that the Templars could have somehow seen something in the shroud that the whole chalice legend grew out of, but that is a story for a different time and up to, I don't know, maybe somebody to bring that out someday. But maybe they saw something on the shroud that gave them the whole chalice thing, and that's how that grew out of. But originally, the Holy Grail was the Shroud of Turin. In every way, it connects to the legend of the Holy Grail, and we still have it today. And it's sitting in a church in Turin, Italy. It holds the blood of what eventually became Jesus in the New Testament. Hope you thought this was interesting. You have a nice day.